Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Speechie Side Hustle podcast, part of the Tassel Podcast Network. It's your go-to show for speech language pathologists looking to turn their passion into a thriving business. My name is Vanita. I'm a certified speech language pathologist, author, and multi-passionate entrepreneur who loves providing solutions for SLPs and caregivers.
And I'm Nicole. I'm an SLPA and proud small business owner. We've been working together now for over 4 years, and we love helping SLPs pursue their passion and have a fulfilling career. Every week, we feature inspirational SLPs and allied professionals who've made their dream a reality, whether it's creating digital products, merchandise, courses, or a private practice on the side.
If you've ever dreamt of taking your skills beyond the therapy room, then you're in the right place. We'll dive into the world of entrepreneurship, offering insights, tips, and real-world advice to help you launch or expand your own Speechie Side Hustle. Let's turn those dreams into reality.
Welcome to the Speechie Side Hustle podcast. Today, we're talking about turning clinical skills into a children's book with Tori Ross. So in today's episode, we're going to learn how SLP principles can be embedded into children's books to support early language and narrative development, identify ways storytelling and shared reading can support language and early literacy skills, explain how books and storytelling can be used as tools to support speech and language development, and how clinicians can expand their impact beyond the therapy room through creative resources while staying rooted in evidence-based practice. Today, we're presented with Tori Ross. I'm very excited for you to be on the podcast today. Would you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, of course. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Tori. I am a pediatric speech language pathologist, and I'm the owner of Talking with Tori Speech Therapy. Before starting my practice, I spent about 5 years working in the New York City Department of Education. And this is where I was really exposed to a wide range of communication deficits. And I really wanted that experience before jumping into that private practice route. I started full-time private practice about a year and a half ago. And currently I'm specializing in early language development, speech sound delays and disorders, motor speech disorders like childhood apraxia of speech, and early literacy skills. I would say that my approach to therapy is very much play-based and child-led. I strongly believe that children do learn best when they feel very comfortable and engaged, and when learning feels just very natural and fun to them. I am also the very proud author of Once Upon a Doodle, A Lion's Adventure, which we'll be talking all about today. I can't wait to share more about it. And I guess I'm also really passionate in supporting parents along their child's communication journey. I know how overwhelming it can feel, and my goal is to always make language development feel just more natural, simple, and something that fits into everyday moments and everyday routines, not just during therapy sessions. I do this through offering parent coaching sessions and also by going into schools to help bring some of these strategies into early childhood classrooms as well.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you. As a really quick bio for myself, I'm Nicole Umania dos Santos. I am the COO and ASHA CEA for Tassel Learning, and also the host of the Speechie Side Hustle podcast. I've worked as an SLPA for many years. And I have a bachelor's degree from Emerson College. I'm also the founder of Nicole Umana Creative, where I'm supporting small businesses with branding and design strategy. And I am passionate about helping clinicians build aligned, sustainable careers through entrepreneurship and creative growth. All right, let's get into it. So I'm so excited to talk about how you've created Once Upon a Doodle, and also how different SLPs can maybe use their different experience in thinking about what kind of speechy side hustles they want to do. So as an SLP, what inspired you to create Once Upon a Doodle, and how did your clinical experience influence the way the book was designed?
Yeah. So I guess as SLPs, books are one of the tools that we use the most. We use them to introduce themed vocabulary, to teach valuable lessons, whether it's just using books to do so or specific social stories. We target social language through all of that. We're building comprehension skills. The list goes on. But if we're being honest, we've all had the moment during read alouds where a student is either, you look around and like one student is looking out the window, another student's playing with their shoelace, someone's picking their nose, totally checked out. I was even finding that when students were old enough to read the book themselves during therapy, they were often putting so much cognitive effort into the decoding part that the meaning of the story totally got lost. So I wanted to create something that turned that passive reading experience into more of an interactive one. And a lot of my inspiration actually came from clinical work as an SLP. And looking back, one of the resources that changed the game for me and ultimately became the concept behind my book was a platform called GoGo Speech. Are you familiar with GoGo?
No, I've never heard of it.
Okay. It's amazing. Basically, it is a play-based digital resource that features like countless themed wordless picture stories and also comes with companion activities. Each story encourages children to generate the language themselves through inviting characters, and you flip through it on your computer, whether you're doing in-person sessions or virtual sessions, and you join the characters on fun adventures. However, I realized time and time again when I would use this resource in my therapy sessions, which was and still is all the time, there was something missing. And although kids were talking about the story, they weren't actually the ones creating anything within the story. So that was the same idea that influenced the design of Once Upon a Doodle. Instead of just listening to a story, children can draw, imagine, and help to build the narrative as they go. And that really, clinically, that changes everything, right? So when children add something to the story themselves, it's opening the door for higher level thinking questions. We can start asking them questions that require them to problem solve and to target reasoning skills, which I'll get into more like specific examples later on. But that is just, a little bit about how my experience in the clinical field really shaped this book. And I don't think I would be in the same position to have created it if it wasn't for my work in the schools and private practice, so on and so forth.
That's awesome. I think a lot of us can relate when we're doing some sort of like read aloud and nobody's really paying attention, or maybe like you're halfway through the story and you're like, this book is pretty long or more complex than I was expecting. So I feel like that's very relatable for any SLP. So that's, having that kind of foreknowledge and seeing kind of a gap in the market as far as what you're looking for when it comes to a book to use in speech therapy. So would you say that also your experience with early language, maybe motor speech disorders, influenced the way that you structured the story as well?
Totally. So basically in the story, there are different options that students can choose from when following this Lucky the Lion throughout the adventure. And all of the choices have very short phrases, or they're just like 1 to 3 words. So when we're talking about motor speech deficits, it's extremely helpful for children because it is reducing the motor planning demands on them. And then as you continue on through the story and you're practicing all of the targets, you'll see their confidence grows. Those phrases can gradually expand into longer utterances or even sentences. So my experience with motor speech and early language definitely played a role into how I structured it for sure. Even, when just working with the younger kids, they benefit from a clear and predictable narrative structure. So this book very much follows that simple beginning, middle, and end, which provides a scaffold for storytelling of itself.
That's awesome. And can you talk a little bit more about maybe the connection between the forethought you had about what to put into this as far as storytelling and maybe how that will influence the communication skills?
Totally. So a lot of this book was designed to help students sequence and organize their thoughts for a cohesive narrative. So I definitely wanted the story grammar elements that we target all the time as SLPs, that character setting, problem solution. I wanted all of that to be very clear. And there are aspects of this story that students have total control of. Details about what Lucky the Lion wears for the adventure, or what Lucky the Lion's going to pack for the adventure. But a lot of the story elements are part of what's already given to them. The characters are, of course, in the story. The problem is presented for them, but having them, giving them some of that control, I feel locks them in. So again, just making sure that that clear story grammar element is there for them. We use graphic organizers all the time in speech to target those main story grammar elements. At the end of the book, there is a grid of all the pages in the book that have, it's basically a grid of all the pages, and it's asking students to retell the story. So this is helping their sequencing skills, their ability to recall the events from the story. Are they able to use those transition and sequencing words to retell it in a cohesive and clear way? Because hopefully, as a parent or clinician, you are guiding your child along the story. Hopefully you're there to help them provide a clear narrative and make them feel proud of the story that they very much helped to create. I think it really does keep the child so much more engaged because they feel in control.
I love that. So we've already talked a little bit. Our next slide kind of talks about how can speech language pathology principles be embedded into children's books to support early language literacy, narrative development in a natural and engaging way. So you've already touched a little bit on this about how we've kind of engaged through the sequencing, storytelling, and other things. Are there other ways that you were able to embed different principles or even advice you would have to maybe another SLP and maybe a different niche on how they can kind of look at how different principles could be embedded into literacy or a book that maybe they want to create?
So I would definitely tell clinicians who may have similar ideas to think about one, evidence-based practice and just knowing what works. So we know that with little ones, making sure that the language is not too complex, there's not too many vocabulary words embedded into your story that, will lead to a potential language breakdown. Making sure that we have even some rhyming elements that might make the story stick a little bit more for the little ones, to have that sing-song rhyming pattern to it. And to also think about what goals you're ultimately trying to target. I know for me, this was, like I said about go-go speech. I loved that I could sit down, pull up a go-go speech, and target any speech and language goal under the sun. I wanted this resource to do the exact same thing. I wanted a clinician or parent to be able to pick up this book and say, we can target rhyming elements. Let's look out for rhyming pairs, target that phonological awareness. Let's target articulation. Let's find all the target sounds in this book that if a child's working on R, let's find all the R words in this book and practice them. Because this book is a wipe clean board book, let's draw all those target words on the page and you tell me what we're drawing or have me guess what we're drawing. let's work on retell. At the end of the story, I want you using those nice sequencing and transition words that we've been talking about. So ultimately, for clinicians who may have similar ideas with literacy, I would really encourage them to think about what we already know works and what research is out there. And I know we'll talk about the research that I had sent over to you a little bit later, but making sure that you are keeping that in mind, because we're the creatives behind so many different resources, but ultimately we want to go back to the research and what evidence-based strategies we can implement as SLPs into these resources that make it so engaging and so meaningful for students.
Yeah. I love the way that you said that, you're thinking about how the child is going to engage with your book in particular. And what sort of narrative skills can you give us more of an example? Maybe even if you want to show like one of the pages in the book to say like what narrative skills the children are practicing when they are engaging with that. You said it was like a wipe slate or
The white
dry
board.
erase or
Yeah. So there's a dry erase marker.
Mhm.
It is a white clean board book, and it comes with a dry erase marker. And without giving too much of the book away, I will flip to one of the pages where the problem is given already to the child, where the bridge that Lucky has to take to his adventure is closed. So the prompt is, how should our friends get to the other side of the bridge? And there's visual choices always on the left, and then some ideas on the right. So should he float on a raft? Should they swing from a vine or build a path? And then for the older students, they can adapt it more for higher order thinking questions, your own idea. So one of the key narrative skills that I would think of when turning to this page would be the ability to problem solve and to use and to practice grammar and syntax development to be able to express how they're going to solve the problem. So a child can choose, we are going to build a path, and then they will draw it over here. And then that's the perfect time for a clinician or parent to jump in and say, ask all of these follow-up questions. So what is the path going to be made of? How are you going to get those materials to build the path? Or will Lucky jump or swim to the next rock? Giving them a series of prompts if they need it, or letting them take the reins and see how they do with just using language and expressive language skills to talk about solving this problem and overcoming the challenge.
I love that. So you really have adapted it to kind of be able to use it in a wider age range or just
Totally.
however. Yeah, that's great. I love that. So how can parents, educators, and clinicians use books like this to support speech and language development during shared reading?
So I kind of touched on some of the parts, but there are a few really great techniques I would personally use as a parent or clinician who grabs this as a resource. The first one would be to guide participation with very purposeful questions. So help the child move through the story by asking them, like I just showed you before, some really great follow-up questions about their choices. Who do you choose to join Lucky on the adventure? This encourages engagement and supports expressive language. I would embed articulation practice naturally into the story, because children are more intuitive than we think. So we don't want to just be drilling them with articulation practice during the story. But if you use the story as an opportunity to highlight target sounds, like I said, if a child is working on R, then you might want to emphasize words like roar. So every time we see Lucky in the story, maybe that child practices their roar sound, modeling and expanding on language. So based on what the child says, maybe you model a little bit more complete language. If the child says, lucky sleep, maybe you expand it to the lion is sleeping in his bed. Now, that's just principles that rooted in speech therapy that we can use while guiding children through this resource. Encouraging flexible thinking and creativity, asking those open-ended, outside of the box questions like, what else could Lucky bring to the beach? And why would Lucky bring that to the beach? How can that help Lucky? So this promotes vocabulary, imagination, higher level language skills. And then lastly, I always encourage parents to, instead of using questions that would elicit a yes or no response, use those open-ended questions and think about them before you ask. Because instead of saying, is Lucky going to bring a water bottle? Which child can only answer with that with a yes or no. Maybe you say, what can Lucky bring if he needs a drink? So that's, again, just thinking about those receptive and expressive language skills coming to life. This is the perfect opportunity to target that to support prediction, reasoning, and storytelling skills. Another really important and awesome part of this book is that on the back, there is a QR code. And slowly but surely, I'm releasing countless companion activities that target all different speech and language goals. So I know we have a say in color for all different articulation targets, and we have following direction activities, we have tracing activities, we have rhyming activities to be released. So stay tuned because those will all be available for downloading and all that fun stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. And a way that people can use the book over and over again in different ways and be able to create different kind
Totally.
of lesson plans. I love that. And is that like on a website that you're releasing that, or?
Everyone will get notified through Instagram. And if you subscribe to my newsletters also on my website, they are also going to be released through those. There'll be links that, lead everyone to those downloadable companion activities.
Awesome. Oh, that's such good news.
Yeah, hopefully it'll make this a very convenient resource for clinicians and parents. I know that when I was working in the schools, this would have been, I use go-go speech, but this would have been such an amazing tool to grab when your caseload is crazy and, you're working in groups and there's so many skills that you want to target. So this is really such a great resource for having a session that targets just so many goals, and it's just so fun for the kids.
Yeah, I can see that. It's also a passion of yours. So it's nice to see. Hopefully, some other people who have listened to this will also be able to dive into that and be able to get some good ideas for the therapy room. So let's also talk about some of the evidence that you had submitted for this and talk about for maybe different clinicians who have creative ideas of their own. What advice would you give them about expanding their impact beyond the therapy room while still staying rooted in evidence-based practice?
Okay. So some of the research that I found extremely interesting was about dialogic reading. And for those who don't know what dialogic reading is, it is the method where an adult actively involves the child in the story rather than simply reading that text. So that whole idea of making passive reading a much more active, engaging experience, that is what dialogic reading is all about. Key features of dialogic reading include asking WH questions throughout the story, encouraging the child to describe pictures, and prompting the child to predict or retell, expanding on the child's responses, and turning the child into the storyteller. That's dialogic reading in a nutshell. So across both of the studies that I submitted, children, I guess the children that they did the study on, they were all in early childhood to early elementary school years, roughly ages 3 to 6. which, by the way, is a critical period for developing vocabulary, narrative skills, early literacy foundation, all of that good stuff. And the children who experienced the dialogic or interactive reading showed significantly greater language gains than those who experienced just passive reading and just listening to a story being read aloud. Improvements were seen in expressive vocabulary, receptive vocabulary, and oral language skills specifically. So I guess the takeaway from the research is just that how we're reading with children matters more than simply reading to them. When children are actively involved in storytelling, the language learning benefits increases significantly. So I guess it's how we read, not just the fact that we're reading, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how was learning this research and seeing what the benefits are? Because those are a lot of things that you can do with any book, realistically. You
Right.
can ask WH questions. You can try to involve the child in almost any book that you're reading. So what kind of helped you move from an idea to actually going ahead, using your creative juices and creating this resource for people?
So I thought about Gogo speech platform, and I thought about how it's something that we can pull up on our computer. It's something that we can pull up on an iPad, but it's not tangible. You can't hold it. So I knew I wanted all of my ideas to work its way into a book, a physical book. I also knew that I wanted to include the drawing aspect of it as just another layer of that multisensory interactive learning experience for kids who maybe are very artistic learners and they learn best through visuals and kinesthetic learners who learn by doing, and tactile learners and feeling. So I wanted it to be an entire experience, and I guess that's what this is. It really does encompass that idea of dialogic reading, but takes it one step further in that we are putting the child in the driver's seat, right? So we are giving them the ability to choose their own adventure, which so many stories just, you don't get the chance to do. I just thought that if children are making the choices and they feel empowered to create different stories over and over again, it would boost confidence. It would be just such a different overall experience to them. It might make narrative development and storytelling, it might open their eyes to something that they hadn't seen before. I did use, what that research showed. I did want to level it up by including the drawing aspect to the stories. But I think overall, you have to believe in something to make it happen. Like, I thought about this for a long time, and I could have just let it sit there, right? And it would have just been taking up space in my mind. But you have to bring it to fruition. You reach out to necessary networks and you ask questions, you do your research, do your homework, and slowly but surely, Rome wasn't built in a day. This took a lot of time. I had a lot of no's. I turned the no's into yeses. And you kind of just have to feel really passionate about something and keep going for it.
That's awesome. So why do you think, as other SLPs like yourself are probably so uniquely positioned to create resources like this?
I think that we are really great at knowing, first of all, what kids are engaged in. We know best what is age appropriate. We know that we can support children step by step in communication. So we take skills that feel overwhelming, like storytelling, vocabulary, sound development, and we break them down into small manageable pieces that children can actually succeed with. The combination of knowing how to make activities engaging and appropriate for a child's age, and also knowing how to scaffold appropriately, makes learning feel fun while still being really intentional. So it's our perspective that's so valuable when creating materials for families and for children because of that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I feel like, we definitely know what the children we're seeing are talking about. I think one of SLP's best skills is being able to adapt almost anything for whatever your child's goal is. So that's
Totally.
really true. So how do you think clinicians can kind of balance creativity and our entrepreneurship with evidence-based practice?
Again, I kind of touched on it before, but making sure that you're using evidence-based strategies as the foundation for any resource that you create. The creativity can shape how the strategies are presented through storytelling or visuals or different interactive activities, whatever that clinician is coming up with. But the underlying techniques should still reflect what we know supports the speech and language development. So when the creativity is paired with clinical knowledge, it's allowing the clinicians to expand their impact while also staying rooted in best practice.
That makes sense. And is there any other advice you would give? Maybe somebody's listening and maybe they're not looking to create a book, but any kind of resource or some way to bring their creativity outside of the therapy room. What advice would you give them on where to start, what to look for, or how to find or hone in on what their specialty could be?
Yeah, I would say to think about a resource you wish you had when working with a student. I know so many of my ideas, and I have like a list on my phone of just ideas for kids. So much of what I think of is when I have this interesting case and I'm researching, I'm on Teachers Pay Teachers, I'm on all the different, speech websites that often have great resources, and nothing is catching my eye. And I'm like thinking to myself, what does this kid need? What would be the perfect resource? And that's when I would write it down. And the more and more times you come back to it, that's when it might spark something. I know for me, this resource, I just kept coming back to the idea that I want children to feel in control of storytelling. I want them to make choices. I want them to feel confident in talking about what they're drawing and why they're drawing it. And I want them to focus on the problem solving aspect and really hone in on story grammar elements. So my advice is think about a case or a few cases that you just wish there was something else out there for you to grab. And if it doesn't exist, do it. Like, just go for it. It doesn't have to be an elaborate 5-year production. It can be collaborating with another SLP and making some really cool worksheets or making some really cool, I don't know, even just web-based material. Think about what's not there, what would be really helpful, because I guarantee another clinician would benefit from it and love it.
Yeah. I think that's completely true. If you think that you could use this and it would make your life simpler, then it's definitely going to help make
Someone
somebody
else.
else's life simpler as well.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and kind of what you've learned on this journey of creating this book and turning those clinical skills into a resource. Is there anything else you would want to touch on from either of these resources?
I guess the only thing to add, and it's not necessarily these articles specifically, but as all of my close friends become parents, I'm seeing so many of them grab a book before bedtime, and they're just reading the story to their child, which it's intimate, it's so special. It's arguably probably the nicest experience of the day. But so many of them don't realize that there's so many other ways to go about the shared book reading experience. So they're reading all of the words on the page, but when kids are so young, it's more beneficial to point to two things on that page and label them and talk about them. Your 1-year-old is probably not following the plot of a lot of these nighttime reads. So when we're talking about a vocabulary development and working on expressive language, pointing to some familiar items, doggy, woof, woof, hi, doggy, night, night, doggy. Next page, wow, there's a cat, meow, hi, cat, night, night, cat, repeating and kind of just taking a lot of the words away to make it simple, way less intimidating to imitate. That to me is such a key takeaway, and also is part of the dialogic reading that these articles touch on, because it is about that shared experience and making the storytelling engaging and interactive rather than so passive. So I guess that was something I also thought of when reading the articles, just about how people that are close to me in my circle, they sometimes ask, do you have any techniques? My 1-year-old's not talking, or my 2-year-old isn't combining 2 words yet. And oftentimes I jump to, well, what does reading look like for you? So I just know that might be helpful for listeners as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I
Yeah,
think
of course.
we all can relate, and maybe with children that we're, I don't know, caretaking for, or just even in the schools if we're working in pediatric and such, that we can always dial things back and make them simpler, because at the end of the day, what's going to help the child the most is just connection. So
Totally.
that's kind of what they're looking for, and that's always going to help development and help them be more engaged. So thank you so much for
Absolutely.
sharing that. So where can people connect with you, find your book, ask any questions?
Totally. So my website is always a great place to reach me. And I know you have that at the end of these slides. On my website, for any parent who is not really sure where to start, there's actually an interactive quiz that you can kind of take to answer questions, to kind of see where your child is, strengths and weaknesses, and whether or not you do want to go ahead and book a consult with me, or whether or not you think that a evaluation is necessary. So there's that. You can go ahead and just book a free consult to ask me any questions, to pick my brain about anything. I'm happy to always help. And Instagram is also another great place. Feel free to send me a message. I am very active on Instagram. I'm always checking my website. And most importantly, if you are interested in bringing home a Once Upon a Doodle book, definitely check out Amazon. It's there. The link is also, think, on my website, but typing in Once Upon a Doodle, it'll come right up on Amazon. And just be sure to take a cute picture of your child using the story. And I would love to see it if you could send it to me on Instagram or tag me. I love to see the little ones having a great time with the book and working on their communication skills simultaneously.
So that's talkingwithtori.com for anyone who's listening, and on Instagram at talkingwithtori. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciated all of your knowledge, everything that you shared with us, learning so much about your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
If you found today's discussion inspiring and packed with helpful tips to get started, please don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your fellow Speechie Side Hustlers.
For more resources and updates, visit us on Instagram Remember, your passion can be your profession, and we're here to guide you every step of the way.
Keep hustling, Speechies.